everybody, Scott's Maya here, and let me tell you about the most recent lineup movie in the fourth phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, I've got a lot of respect for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. All the way up to Endgame and No Way Home, we had a decade's worth of character building and intricate storytelling. However you define intricate, because it wasn't always very consistent, but still, it was very ambitious, and no other movie franchise has done it to the extent that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done. I think we've had so many different filmmakers with different visions that have culminated this one epic story which climaxed brilliantly in one of the most epic movies ever made in history. Up there with Ben-Hur and Return of the King, got Endgame, and then No Way Home that came afterwards. It's a brilliantly ambitious franchise. Unfortunately, after watching this film, I'm beginning to sense that what I said about my fears of the fourth phase of Marvel might unfortunately be coming true. Now, what did I think of this movie that I saw? It's a pretty dumb, stupid movie, but at the same time, there were some elements of it that were quite awesome. I had no interest in seeing this film, but I've been making some new friends as of late, and they have somebody who works at the cinema somewhere, and she managed to provide for her family and me some free tickets to see Thor: Love and Thunder. So just because we were friends, I decided to come along anyway, because fun thing to do, free tickets, might as well go see the movie. It was great to catch up with them that way, honestly. I think it's great to share a time of friendship building that way. But I'm not here to talk about my own personal friendships. I'm here to talk about my opinion on Thor: Love and Thunder. And before going into this movie, I heard that reception for this movie was very mixed. And after watching this film, yeah, I would agree. I have very mixed feelings on this movie, because on the one hand, I'd probably say this is one of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's lesser films, but on the other hand, there were a few shining elements of amazing potential. But on the other hand, there are some things about this movie that I thought, yeah, that was kind of stupid when I saw it. But then thinking about it afterwards, it just made me kind of angry. But I suppose I should discuss what this film is all about. Okay, so my plot description may be a bit haywire, but hey, I guess that's where the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going. So I'll try my best. Okay, just bear with me. So what is the plot for Thor: Love and Thunder? This, of course, is set after the events of Avengers Endgame, that big event where Thanos had collected the Infinity Stones to try to wipe out half the universe for population control. Thor lost his hammer Mjolnir to the goddess Hela in a prior film called Thor Ragnarok. And Thor had to make a new axe called Stormbreaker in order to stop Thanos in Infinity War, only to fail and then fight Thanos again in Endgame. Just to catch things, just so we're on the same ground here. My description was probably more confusing than it had any right to be. So essentially, to make a long story short, Thor, as well as Valkyrie and Korg, have founded a new Asgard, because, as Odin said, Asgard's not a location, it's the people. So, some time has passed after the events of Endgame, and people are living in peace, and New Asgard has become somewhat of a tourist attraction. Meanwhile, Thor, who was previously quite fat, has been traveling with the Guardians of the Galaxy and has gotten himself back into shape. He's been going on various adventures with the Guardians of the Galaxy, alongside Korg, and they go on some adventures that are honestly quite worthy of, like, rock album covers. Honestly, that would make for brilliant music compilations. Like, to be fair, there was a cool intro of Marvel Studios with, like, the rock guitar that made me go like, yeah, Yeah, I'm really feeling it. I guess I just like rock music. So anyway, we see their exploits, and seeing how this is another Taika Waititi directed movie, Thor and some of his other comrades don't always take their adventures too seriously. Okay, the Guardians take the job more seriously, but Thor, being quite overpowered as he is not taking adventures too seriously. But they do come across these, honestly, rather cool, practical-looking bird things that look something straight out of a Jim Henson movie. And Thor and the Guardians manage to save the day, the locals are thankful, but unfortunately, there's something ominous at play. For you see, there are many gods throughout different realms that are being slain and killed by Gorr, the God Killer. Thor parts ways from the Guardians of the Galaxy and goes to investigate what's potentially going on. And basically the whole conflict is all about Gorr wanting to wipe out all the gods that have ever existed because there was this one particularly nasty god that Gorr previously worshipped who was responsible for the death of his own daughter. And so, when he got his hands on this necro sword, he decided to try to kill all the gods in existence. And as it turns out, there's this place in the center of the universe or whatnot called Eternity, where Gorr could potentially have his wish fulfilled. If he gets his wish fulfilled, then that could threaten all of existence. So, Thor teams up with Korg, Valkyrie, who's in charge of New Asgard, as well as Thor's former girlfriend, Jane Foster, who has not made an appearance for some time, in order to try to stop Gorr before he achieves his goals. There is something rather tragic happening with Jane Foster, because tragically she has been diagnosed with cancer. Oh boy, another cancer-diagnosed character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Jane Foster is dying, and yet she feels a calling towards Mjolnir. And by the will of Mjolnir, Mjolnir fixes itself back together so that Jane Foster can wield Mjolnir and become female Thor. Mjolnir could fix itself back together. I'll get back to that. As Gorr the God Killer kidnaps the children of New Asgard to try to lure Thor and his companions to fight him so that he can trick them into gaining access to Eternity to fulfill his wish to kill the gods, Thor and his companions try to recruit more gods in order to fight off Gorr, but they don't seem to be in the mood to fight such a threat. So, what is Thor and his companions going to do to Thor? So how is Thor and his companions going to defeat Gorr? Well, the power of love and thunder will surely stop him, right? Will it stop him? So I guess that's pretty much the plot summary, and I have several problems with this plot. And I just want to say right off the bat, Taika Waititi is one of the best directors from New Zealand in contemporary history. Taika Waititi has provided so many brilliant stories. I've yet to see Jojo Rabbit, but I heard that was brilliant. He's the kind of director who can find the light in the darkness, and that's what makes his comedy films so endearing in the hearts of so many people. And the reason people latched onto Thor Ragnarok was because it was such a refreshing break from the all too self-serious Thor the Dark World, which was probably the most boring of the Marvel Cinematic Universes, with so many cliches and a boring villain and a generic story. Not that Thor the Dark World was entirely bad or entirely boring, it was just boring compared to other Marvel Cinematic Universe films. So when the next Thor movie came out, directed with the vision of Taika Waititi, it was a refreshing break from those boring cliches. However, watching this movie, it's kind of reminding me of when I watched the first two Despicable Me movies and then went to see the Minions movie. Now, I don't know if I've made this clear in the past, but I don't like the Minions movie. And it's kind of strange because the Minions as characters were really funny in the first two Despicable Me movies. But then the Minions movie came out and they started getting really annoying. So how is it that the funniest characters in that movie suddenly became so annoying? It's because they were overplayed to the point where their jokes became less funny and became more tiring. In the Despicable Me movies, you had Gru to balance things out for older audiences, as well as the Minions for a good laugh. But if you have too much of the childish, immature humor from the Minions, it gets tired pretty quickly. And the same kind of structure applies to Thor, Love and Thunder, unfortunately. Taika Waititi has this sort of childish sense of humor, which can work for certain situations, but it's really overplayed in this movie. There's just way too many scenes where they're trying to cram in a joke in almost every possible way, to the point where they literally have screaming goats as a running gag. Okay, seriously, you're trying to use internet humor constantly to elevate your film? It kind of gets irritating pretty quickly. In fact, I just realized something. The Minions in the Minions movie, the Screaming Goats in this movie, and Taika Waititi's more childish-oriented humor have one thing in common. They work in short bursts, but when you try to stretch them out, they get irritating pretty quickly. Unfortunately, the more childish aspect of Taika Waititi's humor is quite remnant throughout most of this movie, and it gets pretty tiresome pretty quickly. Gone are the days where the Marvel Cinematic Universe could have quippy lines and gags, and it's quite genuinely funny and still progresses the plot along. Now, it just feels like they're trying to cram in jokes almost every single time, and because these jokes feel more forced rather than natural and flowing with the plot, it gets quite irritating pretty quickly. And maybe Taika Waititi was getting carried away from his success with Thor Ragnarok. I mean, I wouldn't blame him if that was the case, but perhaps if Taika Waititi had another director to try to control him, I think they could have made something great. With that said, however, there are some genuinely serious dramatic moments in this movie that genuinely do work. In fact, Taika Waititi can clearly do serious dramatic moments quite well, as showcased in several moments in this movie. So perhaps if Taika Waititi applied that psychological mentality of his efforts into the dramatic moments and tried applying that more often throughout the film, we could have had a better paced movie. Yet unfortunately, because Taika Waititi is amplifying his more childish sense of humor throughout his movie, most of it just comes across as cheap. And the worst thing about this approach, and which leads to the thing that I hate the most about this movie, is the way it trivializes some key events in the past and present. It's one of those things, as I said, that I just thought, the way certain scenes were played out, I was kind of stupid. But then the more I thought about it, the more it made me legitimately kind of angry. Let me explain this quite clearly. The movie makes it clear that Jane Foster has got cancer. That is quite a serious subject, yes. And the film doesn't really make fun of the cancer. No. At least I don't think it does. I don't think I have a problem with that subplot, although I think that could have had more attention driven to it. It's the fact that Jane Foster gains the worthiness to wield Mjolnir's hammer in a seemingly mundane way. Okay, in Marvel lore, Odin amplifies this power in Mjolnir that only those who are worthy to wield the power shall possess the power of Thor. In the first Thor movie, Thor was quite an arrogant jerk, so Thor was banished from his godhood and had to earn his godhood back by embracing humility. The moment he did so, he managed to wield his hammer Mjolnir again. And throughout the Marvel franchise, there have been other characters who have proved themselves worthy to wield such power by being humble enough to wield it, such as Vision as introduced in Age of Ultron, and later on down the line, Captain America, when he was almost beaten to a pulp by Thanos in Endgame, which led to a lot of hype and was brilliantly built up when he barely just nudged the hammer in Age of Ultron. Now, here, I have fairly mixed reception on the concept of Jane Foster being able to wield Thor's hammer. I can understand that being diagnosed with cancer can put her in such a humiliating position that she would want to actively, that she could gain this power. I get the idea that Jane Foster is diagnosed with cancer, which brings her to a state of humility, of being able to wield Thor's hammer to make up for this position she's finding herself in. However, the way she acquires the power of Thor could have been handled so much better. Because the way the film portrays it, it came across as she's doing science work, and the cancer seems to be treated more as an inconvenience for her science studies rather than the actual life-threatening disease that it is. Oh, don't get me wrong, the film does not shy away from the seriousness of cancer by any means, but just the way it was portrayed, it kind of felt more like an inconvenience rather than an actual threat. So her really getting to wield the hammer from that position kind of felt cheap, especially when she read the book being able to cure her for great health. But it came across more as she needs great health so she can continue her science. Now, I don't know if the film explicitly said that, but that's what it came across. If she really was worthy to wield Thor's hammer, I think it could have gone more something like this. I think we need Jane Foster to be in a position where she's legitimately dying. Not just discomforted, but legitimately dying. Like, about to enter the afterlife, dying. So, she's entered a state in her cancer where she is struggling. She's fighting hard to stay alive. And then the world's in danger. She could just reach out her hand, just think, I wish I could help Thor. And then the clouds start to swirl. And in her desperate cry, in her most desperate hour, she has this cancer that she's fighting. And yet, despite her cancer, she still wants to help people. And in this position of being cancer-ridden, she's lying there in her bed, and she reaches out, wanting to help Thor. And then she hears the calling. She reaches out, and then BAM! Mjolnir comes back at her hand. How much more awesome would that have been? That would have been so much better, and that would have made her achieving the worthiness to wield Mjolnir much more gratifying. It would have felt more like she earned that power. The way it came across in the film, it didn't really feel like she earned it that much. Also, I have a big problem with the fact that Mjolnir is able to reassemble itself. That completely ridicules and practically mocks Thor's efforts throughout some previous movies in the MCU. Let me give you the context once again so I can justify why I am angry at this certain element with the movie. In Thor Ragnarok, Thor had Mjolnir and was ready to fight Hela when she was unleashed. Thor chucked Mjolnir at her, she caught Mjolnir and broke it into pieces. And the way the film was presented, it was presumed that Thor could never again wield Mjolnir, leaving Thor and Loki in a desperate position. And later on, in the next film in Thor's continuity of Infinity War, Thor had to go out of his way to make a new weapon he could wield, Stormbreaker. He had to go through all that effort, and just arriving at the battlefield on time to potentially stop Thanos, only to fail, only to then meet Thanos and then kill him again, only to fail, only to then use Stormbreaker properly to fight Thanos again. And then here is Thor, God of Thunder, telling us that, Mjolnir could reassemble itself just like that. Are you kidding me? So Mjolnir could reassemble itself? If that's the case, this is where the MCU is beginning to retcon itself. If Mjolnir could reassemble itself, why couldn't Thor just summon Mjolnir to reassemble itself when he was fighting Hela? Why did he need to go through the effort of forging Stormbreaker when he could just reassemble Mjolnir and fight Thanos with it? It would have saved a lot of time and effort and could have helped out the Avengers immensely. Did Thor not realize that he could potentially get Mjolnir and wield it back together? Did he honestly not know he could do that? And yet Jane somehow knew she could? If Mjolnir could call to Jane Foster, why didn't Mjolnir call Thor to reassemble itself to fight Hela and save many a problem in Ragnarok? You're telling me that all this time, Thor got himself humiliated, had his home destroyed, had to fight a Titan that killed his brother, forged a new weapon to stop this Titan, only to have this Titan wipe out half the galaxy anyway. You're telling me Mjolnir could have reassembled itself any time? That just ridicules all the effort Thor went through those movies and ridicules his character growth. And I know Mjolnir grants the power to those who are worthy, but how come Jane Foster, who has limited fighting experience, is able to wield Mjolnir with such ease compared to Thor, who's had Mjolnir for thousands of years? It just doesn't make any sense. But it gets even more baffling because later on in the film, in the climax, Thor could apparently give the power to be Thor to the children captives. Literally at that scene, my reaction was, that was literally my expression. My hands were up, my mouth was like that, and my eyes were like, wait a minute. Thor could grant the power of Thor to the child captives? Thor could grant the power of the Norse god of thunder to anybody at any time? So why didn't he grant that power to the Avengers team? Do you see the problems when you introduce new powers like this? Why didn't Thor give the other Avengers team Thor-style powers when facing the big threats? Why didn't Thor grant the Thor powers to the Avengers team when they were fighting Loki's army? Why didn't Thor grant Thor-like powers when they were fighting Ultron and his army? Why didn't Thor grant Thor powers to the wider span of Avengers team and more people from around the galaxy when trying to fight Thanos? Heck, you have Captain Marvel, who's already overpowered as she is. What would have happened if she had Thor-like powers? She would practically be a goddess! You're telling me that Thor had the power to give all the characters, any character, like the power to be like Thor at any time, and only now he's using this. These new powers, they ridicule the character growth and the story elements set up in the previous movies. Like, can you see why I'm angry at this? It just doesn't make sense with the continuity. Again, it's the type of movie where you just kind of pass it off as, oh, that was kind of stupid when you were watching this. But when you think about it more critically, it just completely ridicules the brilliant stories that came before. Previously, Thor was this character who learned from the loss that he experienced. Now all that loss means nothing because of these random new powers that grant him new godlike abilities. It's all ridiculed because of these new powers that are just randomly introduced out of the blue. And what infuriates me even further about this movie is the fact that it just trivializes so many important elements. It trivializes and mocks the pain and loss that Thor has been through with the opening monologue that Korg gives. Like, Korg's a funny character, but here Korg just becomes a nuisance, especially with the way the film is cutting to Thor's life and the way Korg's narrating, like, I mean, if you just showed Korg's narration alone, I'm sure it would have been a fun, lighthearted laugh, but the fact that they show these painful, dramatic scenes that Thor has been through with Korg's monologue, it just makes the pain that Thor has been through just look like a joke. And there's so many other examples where they take serious things and just make it into a joke. Like, there's a scene where they managed to kill off Zeus. Oh dear, we're gonna get chased down. Oh, well, I guess we'll just pass that off. Oh my days. The whole thing just doesn't feel like what Marvel used to be. It just feels like a corporate hoax. And you know what's the funny thing is? There's even a scene where Zeus is whispering something to Thor about, listen, we're trying to be safe and pleasant for all the people here, okay? So please don't spread things around. That might, ironically enough, be Hollywood's response to the critics of, like, the MCU Phase 4 as of late. Okay, I got legitimately angry at what I just explained, but for all this movie's faults, there is one redeeming quality, however you define redeeming, well, I suppose it is redeeming in the end. One redeeming quality of this movie that I legitimately think was awesome. The villain. The villain of this movie is quite possibly one of the best MCU villains I've ever seen. Like, up there with the villain from Black Panther, up there with Thanos, up there with Zemo from Civil War. One of the best villains. Elevated all the more by the fact that he's portrayed brilliantly by Christian Bale. Christian Bale, if you're watching this, you're awesome, mate. You're a real nice guy. You're a real nice guy. The opening minutes of this film introduces Gore as this truly tragic character and a brilliant justification for him being a villain. Gore, played by Christian Bale, is carrying his sickly daughter through the desert. He's dying, but through it all, his daughter still has a craving for the creative arts as she carves on rocks. And Gore is worshipping this pagan deity in hopes that they'll make it through the desert alive. Yet tragically enough, his daughter just doesn't quite make it. And she dies. And it's a really intimate, sorrowful scene for only a few minutes worth of screen time. As he buries his daughter, he's still holding the grave like he was rubbing her head to sleep. He keeps walking and he finds, just beyond the horizon, there's this jungle full of rich water and rich food. His daughter didn't quite make it, but nevertheless, he dives into the pool, soaking things up, and he's clawing his way, just desperately eating the food, only for the pagan god that he worshipped to laugh and mock at him. As it turns out, this pagan deity never cared about all the family that Gore has ever known. All he cared about was making these subjects just to boost his own ego and saying that he only created the humans just so he could have a sense of superiority, especially after they just killed this necromancer god threat. Gore is absolutely disillusioned by this pagan deity that he once worshipped. He feels a strange calling from the necrosword. He takes it up and he slays this false god before him. This false god explains that the necrosword is cursed, yet the curse is already affecting Gore, and he says, this doesn't feel like a curse. And he embraces the monster inside. So Gore makes it his ambition to destroy all the gods, to avenge his daughter in his anger of these gods' hypocrisies. Christian Bale has a very commanding presence with Gore on screen. What makes Gore so interesting compared to other Marvel Cinematic Universe characters is that I can actually understand his pain and his struggle, and even every time he's in a fight scene, he doesn't altogether feel like an overpowered villain, which, I mean, he is, but the way he uses his sword, it kind of feels like he's struggling to keep up with the fight as much as Thor is. For example, during the fight scenes, Even though Gore is an overpowered character, I can still feel he's struggling to keep up with fighting as much as Thor is with Gore. After all, Gore is this human who is barely just getting to grasp with this necro sword, which he's having had for many years now. And you can understand the source of his anger. Honestly, I think Gore might be a bit too good for this movie. However you define good. But not only is he potentially sympathetic, but he's legitimately threatening. Whether it be childhood nightmares of being kidnapped by shadowy creatures at nighttime, or perhaps it could be the way that Gore overpowers his opponents and exposes their sorrows. The film even manages to somewhat redeem Gore by the end of the movie. And during said redemption scene, Thor says, quite frankly, one of the most profound truths of all time, that everybody is seeking love. However, much like that, the moral lesson of Asgard is not a location, it's the people, as spoken by Thor Ragnarok, the moral isn't really shown at play as much throughout the movie, even though it's a really important message to learn. In fact, this profound truth of everybody seeking love is probably so important to human philosophy, I might just dedicate an entire video to that at some point, if and when I get the time to do it. At the same time, though, I have heard complaints that the fact that there is this power that can grant any wish to make anything happen also kind of ridicules some other things. Like, if Thor knew that this place existed, why didn't he use it to wipe out the existence of Thanos? Why didn't he use it to do something with the Infinity Stones? Why didn't he use it to do this and that? Yeah, again, this movie introduces certain things which ridicules certain elements of the past movies that came before. Although, to be fair, I got the impression that that whole wish thing was kind of a one-off thing. So maybe Thor was saving for that, but still, he could have used the one wish thing to wipe out, like, all threats in existence. Or, like, bring peace to all existence? I don't know. Well, then again, if he brought peace to all existence, Thor would threaten his access to Valhalla. Oh yeah, and for all the stupid jokes that were in the film, there were one or two jokes that, I admit, they made me laugh. Like, for the most part, I just got like a, But there were some jokes, like this companion that Thor meets, he says to his companion, your arm got chopped off, but you're meant to die fighting in a gruesome battle in order to reach Valhalla, so maybe your arm is in Valhalla. I will admit, that made me laugh. There's other scenes where there were certain elements that were, quite frankly, rather stupid, but there were some elements in such scenes that also made me laugh, so yeah, I suppose there's going to be many reviews on Thor Love and Thunder, but I guess that was my 2 cents on it. And I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm very fond of the direction that the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as it is in Phase 4, I don't think I like the direction it's going in. Like, if Thor Love and Thunder, and from what I've heard about their feedback from Multiverse of Madness and other recent products of Phase 4 are telling me anything, it's that the Marvel Studios has not been able to live up to the hype of Endgame since, well, Endgame. With that said, some elements of some of the TV shows, as well as all of No Way Home, did work as events that happened after Endgame. But as it is, the MCU has just lost its spark. As I was walking home from seeing the movie, I was telling my friends that the current state of I'm paraphrasing, that the MCU as it is now is like a party that's gone on for a bit too long. The party has reached its climax and you're so happy that you went. But then the party hosts just try to keep the party going just a little bit longer and a little bit longer. It seems promising at first, but then they try to introduce a few quirks that just start to degrade the quality of the party, and you start getting exhausted, and you just think, okay, time out. But they try to keep hurling stuff, even though they're ironically making it worse, and you just think, okay, just stop, give me a break. I've been hearing rumors from several people that Phase 4, that the movies in Phase 4 of Marvel Cinematic Universe has been losing box office money. And if that really is true, then it means that people are losing interest in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which means they've already seen everything that this storyline has to offer. The MCU used to brilliantly combine the Hollywood business with some engaging storytelling. Now, it seems that they're beginning to make films where they expect their audiences to turn their brains off. Well, let me be frank, Hollywood. If myself and other people wanted to see films where we turn off our brains and just enjoy what's in front of us, we would have gone to see Fast and the Furious. We would have gone to see the Fast and the Furious. We would have gone to see the Fast and the Furious. The quality of these movies just doesn't quite capture the quality of the previous films. Like, even the Guardians of the Galaxy were kind of treated as somewhat dust in the wind for the most part. In fact, I don't even think Gamora was there. Correct me if I'm missing something, but am I the only one who knows that Gamora wasn't there? Did she go off somewhere during Endgame? I'll need to watch Endgame again. By this point, the MCU doesn't feel like it wants to continue a grand narrative anymore. It just feels like it's pandering. And it's very clear that they're pandering, because they're overlooking some of these intricacies of this grand narrative that they formed. They introduced new mechanics for the sake of entertainment, but they seem to have overlooked that they completely ridicule what came before. They've ridiculed their very foundation. And even though this film is not the worst thing I've ever seen, it's just fairly disheartening that this is where the MCU is going, and if this is the direction that all the future MCU movies and content is going in, I'm sorry, I can't see any reason why I should keep investing in this franchise anymore. I'm sorry, I can't see any reason to get invested in this franchise anymore. I think I've said in the past, if you're going to continue a franchise, and if you're going to continue making legitimately good stories, then by all means, continue your franchise. But at this moment, Marvel just seems to be lacking the ability to make good stories. If they want to find success, they're better off just starting from the ground up with a new line of characters. Because soon you're going to have these films that are a jumbled mess, and it'll be very hard for other people who are new to the franchise to keep up. Sure, it might make for some good popcorn quality entertainment, but such entertainment is leeching off the foundations of the brilliant stories that came before. So yeah, it kind of makes me sad inside that the MCU is just not what it used to be. But you know what? At least we can count our blessings with what came before, eh? Now, what to rate this movie? Because it's not the worst thing I've seen, but it's definitely not the best. I was going to give this movie something along the lines of like 5 out of 12, but given what I've just talked about, I think I'm going to give this a 4.9 out of 12. Maybe because 4 kind of rhymes with Thor. Yeah, 4.9 out of 12 seems suitable, because this film wasn't completely terrible. It did have some things that made it worth watching, like the villain and perhaps the music, and a few dramatic scenes and a few funny bits that worked, but for the most part, it was a rather irritating and disheartening experience. I'm sorry. If you've seen Thor: Love and Thunder, what did you think of the movie? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know down in the comments below. I look forward to future conversations. Thank you all so much for watching. Tune in next time for more content.
ScotsThinker signing out.
I see it, and now it's all within my reach. Possibility. I see it now. It's always been inside of me. And now I feel so free. And it's possibility.
Okay, forgive me if the camera is backward. I've got terrible camera positioning. I'm not exactly the most practical thinker. Anyway, sort myself out. Just more casual, more sexy, or more sorted out.